Alright, so I have a bit of a hot take when it comes to the Bayverse movies. I believe that the ending that we got in the Dark of the Moon film is better than the ending that we got in the novel and comic adaptations. So getting into it, as I'm sure most of you know, that there was a leak of the comic book adaptation of Dark of the Moon on Amazon. It's supposed to be a sneak peek thing where you only saw a few pages of the story, but it turns out it posted basically the entire thing. And it is believed that because of this leak, the ending of the film was changed. Now, I don't know if that is true or just hearsay that's been believed ever since the movie came out, but that's kind of the common thing that goes around. But now the original ending featured in that comic and in the novel for Dark of the Moon is that Megatron kinda changes sides in a way. He helps Optimus Prime defeat Sentinel, like it's an intentional team up. Sentinel is killed by his own rust cannon, and Megatron proposes a truce and says that he will go back to Cybertron, take the Decepticons with him, and once Cybertron is rebuilt, he'll call for the Autobots. Now, the comic version actually doesn't really go into all of that. That's mostly from the novel. The comic kind of just stops once Sentinel is defeated and Megatron is just kind of speaking, and it does the whole "who would you be without me" Prime, and that's essentially it. It kind of ends on a cliffhanger, but the novel goes into much more detail. Now, obviously this did not happen in the movie. Instead, in the film, Megatron gets pissed off and attacks Sentinel without intentionally helping Optimus. Then Megatron proposes a less than sincere truce. He is killed, and then Sentinel is killed. And it's become kind of the popular opinion, I would say that the novel / comic ending is the better version of Dark of the Moon. Whether it's because you think it makes Optimus look bad, or just because you think it's genuinely better written or something like that, people do tend to prefer this version. And don't get me wrong, I do see it as a sort of a what if, a neat one at that, but I just don't think this really gels well with the other two movies, particularly in the case of Megatron. That really is my biggest factor when it comes to preferring how the film itself did the ending compared to the novel and the comic, because in those you get a lot more of Megatron's mental state. In the film, it's pretty obvious that, you know, he's very kind of broken down, weary of everything, but it's not to the same extent that the novel and comic show it, where he really is just like, damn, I'm tired of all of this. And if it is true that the ending of the film was changed fairly last minute, then we weren't going to get that stuff, because that really isn't in the film. So between that and then just how Megatron's portrayed in the first two movies, I just don't really think it works all that well, even taking into account him feeling tired with everything. I just don't think it works with Bayverse Megatron. And then there is the whole truce thing, because, you know, he does come in to genuinely help Optimus Prime. It's not because he's pissed off at Sentinel and he just so happens to help Optimus. He intentionally does it and then proposes a sincere truce. He falls to his knees and even tells Optimus to kill him, and again, I just don't see Bayverse Megatron doing that. And I really do feel like if this was the ending that we would have gotten, especially without all of the inner monologue type stuff, which it really doesn't look like we would have gotten regardless, people would be complaining that it was very out of character and out of left field for this to happen. I genuinely believe that's the case. I think people only prefer Megatron doing this and acting like this because they don't like the ending that we did end up getting. Which, no, that's fair. You can prefer one or the other. I just think the ending that we got gels a bit more. Yeah, sure, Megatron's tired. He's weary of everything. He might not really want to keep going to a certain extent, but in Dark of the Moon, this is his last, like, big plan. One that he thought was abandoned long ago. Or at least one that he thought that wouldn't work because Sentinel was implied to be dead. The Ark was supposedly blown up. But now the pieces have fallen so that this kind of big grand plan could work. And to me, just with how Bayverse Megatron is, it really does make sense for him to be goaded into attacking Sentinel and seemingly taking back his leadership. I just really feel like him seeing this threat and trying to take it down so he can establish himself back on top just makes sense. And if you want to compare the truce proposals, I mean, he's way less sincere in the movie, to the point where I really feel like it's a mocking gesture to Optimus, especially because he's just talking about he only wants to be back in charge. Not to mention a truce is just a brief, you know, we're not gonna fight. I just genuinely believe that's more in line with Bayverse Megatron than him just being like, yeah, I'm done. I'm gonna rebuild the planet so we can live in peace. I also feel like things with Sentinel are handled better here as well. Yes, the poetic justice of him being killed with his own rust cannon is great, and I do like that. But his death in the film, to me, feels like a better comeuppance. Sentinel was absolutely fucking wrecked by someone that he thought he had put in his place, and then he's left crawling on the ground, beaten and pathetic, trying to justify himself to the end. And Optimus, recognizing what Sentinel had become, puts him out of his misery. And I genuinely do just think that's better, especially from the point of view of this is a character that most people will hate
great because of him betraying the Autobots and of course killing Ironhide. Again, the novel/comic death is great, do not get me wrong, I just think how it's done here is better. The one thing that I will, however, give the comic and novel is that there would definitely be less complaints over Sentinel's death compared to the movie. You know, the accusations of Prime being merciless and of course war crimes, this and that, blah blah blah. The way the novel and comic goes about it, I don't think there would be any of those same complaints. Granted, you guys should know by now that I have no issues with the way Sentinel was killed in the film. If you want more details on that, please check out the Dark of the Moon section of the In Defense of Michael Bay's Optimus Prime video.
Now, of course, Dark of the Moon ended up getting sequels, but I do feel like the ending that we got is better for a closure of everything, you know, the end to the trilogy. Yeah, sure, it does suck that all the Decepticons died, but it makes sense to me, and I do feel like it is a bit more of a satisfying conclusion. There's definitely some interesting stories you could have done with sequels to the novel ending of Dark of the Moon, but since Dark of the Moon was meant to be, at the time obviously, the end, I feel like the ending that we got makes way more sense. The bad guys are defeated, the good guys won. It's implied that there will be happy times ahead with Sam and Carly getting married and this and that, and Optimus Prime's ending speech is pretty hopeful. And hey, I can see how the novel ending would be pretty good for a conclusion, the two sides essentially making peace. I'm not sure that's completely the case, but that's what they're going for. They're making peace, and the future for the Cybertronians seems to be a little brighter than it at least was. So I could definitely see how it could be seen as better. But just considering Megatron and the past few movies and this being the trilogy capper and whatnot, I genuinely believe that the ending that we got is better than the novel and comic adaptations of Dark of the Moon. And I'm totally aware that this is a bit of a hot take and maybe an unpopular opinion, but I genuinely believe it. The novel is a pretty neat what if type thing, and I don't dislike it or anything. I just really do believe what we got is way better. But tell me, which ending for Dark of the Moon do you prefer? Do you like what we got in the film with Optimus killing Megatron and Sentinel and just ending everything? Or do you like Optimus and Megatron teaming up to take down Sentinel and Megatron being sincere with his truce? Which one do you think is the better conclusion for the Bay trilogy? Let me know down in the comments. Before we go, I want to point out my shop on Bonfire with a couple of shirts, specifically the Bay Prime Did Nothing Wrong shirt, love that one. Then I want to shout out my patrons. In my Average Bird tier, there is Schmoptimus Prime and Demonic Whisper, and in my Bird of Prey tier, there is Austin Gillis and Nighthawk. You guys are awesome for supporting the channel, thank you. And as always, I want to give a big thanks to everyone for watching, and have a good one.